Chapter 16 of Canadian Fairy Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Tori Fisher. Canadian Fairy Tales by Cyrus Macmillan. Rainbow and the Autumn Leaves. In olden days, long before the Indians came to Canada, all the animals talked and worked like men. Every year after midsummer, they held a great council at which they were all present. But it happened once in the summer, before the council met, that they all wanted to go to the sky to see what the country up there was like. None of them could find a way to go. The oldest and wisest creature on all the earth was Turtle. One day he prayed to the thunder god to take him to the sky, and his prayer was soon answered. There was a great noise, as if the earth had been split asunder, and when the people next looked for Turtle, he was nowhere to be found. They searched everywhere without success, but that evening, when they looked upwards, they saw him in the sky, moving about like a black cloud. Turtle liked the sky so well that he decided to live there always and to send his descendants later to the earth. And the sky people agreed to keep him. They asked him, "Where do you want to dwell?" And he answered,
"I should like to dwell in the black cloud, in which are the ponds and streams and lakes and springs of water, for I always dwelt near these places when I was young."
So he was allowed to have his wish. But when the great council of the animals met on earth in the time of the harvest moon, he was always present. He came in the black cloud, but he always went back to the sky after the council was ended, and the other animals envied him his good fortune, and they wished that they could go with him. After a time, the animals were greatly distressed and angered by the rumor that a new race of creatures was coming from far over the ocean to inhabit their land. They talked it over very carefully, and they all thought how fortunate it would be if they could all go to the sky with old Turtle and live like him, free from fear and trouble and care. But they were puzzled to know how to get there, for Turtle had never told any of them the way. One day, Deer, wandering about alone in the forest, as was his custom, came across Rainbow, who often built a path of many colors to the sky, and he asked Rainbow,
"Carry me up to the sky, for I want to see Turtle."
But Rainbow was afraid to do it, for he wished first to ask the thunder god for permission. And he put Deer off, and to gain time he said, "Come to me in winter, when I stay for a time on the mountain near the lake. Then I will gladly carry you to the place where Turtle dwells." Throughout the long winter months, Deer looked longingly for Rainbow, but Rainbow did not come. Life was growing harder on the earth, and the animals were in terror of the new race that was soon to come to their land. And Deer was very timid and impatient. At last, one day in the early summer, Rainbow came again, and Deer hastened to meet him.
"Why were you false to me?"
he asked.
"I waited for you all winter long, on the mountain by the lake, but you did not come as you promised. I want to go to the sky now, for I must see Turtle."
Rainbow answered, "I cannot take you now, but some day, when there is a fog over the lake, I shall come back to drive it away. Come to me then, and I shall take you to the sky and to the place where Turtle dwells. This time I will not deceive you." Rainbow consulted the thunder god, and received permission to do as Deer wished. Soon afterwards, the fog one day rolled in a thick bank across the lake, and Deer hurried out to wait for Rainbow. Sure enough, Rainbow came down, as he had promised, to drive the fog away. He threw his arch of many colors from the lake to the blue hills far away, and the fog at once disappeared from the place. And he said to Deer, who stood watching over him, "Now I will keep my promise. Follow my many-colored path over the hills and the forests and the streams, and be not afraid, and you will soon reach Turtle's home in the sky." Deer did as he was told, and soon he reached the sky. Turtle was glad to see him, and Deer liked the country so well that he decided to stay forever. And he roamed over the sky everywhere, moving like the wind, from place to place. When midsummer had passed, and the harvest moon had come, and the great council again met together, Deer was absent for the first time in his life. The animals waited long for him to appear, for they needed his advice, but he did not come. They sent the birds out to find him. Black Hawk and Woodpecker and Blue Jay all sought him in the forest, but they could not find a trace of him. Then Wolf and Fox scoured the woods far and near, but they came back and reported that he could not be found anywhere. At last, Turtle arrived at the meeting of the great council, as was his custom, coming in his black cloud, in which were the ponds and lakes and streams and springs of water. And Bear said,
"Deer is absent from the council meeting. Where is Deer? We cannot meet without him, for we need his advice."
And Turtle replied,
"Deer is in the sky, have you not heard? Rainbow made a wonderful pathway for him of many varied colors, and by that he came to the sky. There he is now."
And he pointed to a golden cloud scurrying across the sky overhead. Turtle advised that the animals should all go to the sky to live until they could be sure that the new race of creatures would bring them no harm. And he showed them the pathway that Rainbow had made, stretching from the earth in wonderful colors. The animals all agreed at the great council to take Turtle's advice, but they were all very angry at Deer for leaving them without warning, for they thought that all the animals should either stay together faithfully on the earth or go all together to the sky. Bear showed the greatest anger and annoyance. Because of his great strength, he had no fear of the new race that was said soon to be coming, and he had always been inclined to look with scorn on Deer's timid and impatient ways.
"Deer has forsaken us," he said. "He deserted us in the hour of our danger, and that is contrary to forest laws and to our code of defense."
And he thought to himself,
"I shall punish him for this when the time comes."
In the late autumn, the time agreed upon came for the animals to leave the earth, and Rainbow again made his bright path for them to the sky. Bear was the first to go up because he was the leader, and because with his great weight he wanted to test the strength of the bridge of burning colors over which they had to pass. When he had almost reached the sky, he met Deer on the path, waiting to welcome the animals to their new home. And he said to him in anger,
"Why did you leave us behind without warning for the land of the turtle? Why did you desert the great council? Why did you not wait until all could come together? You are a traitor to your comrades, and you have been false to our faith."
And Deer answered, also in anger,
"Who are you to doubt me or my faith? None but the wolf may ask me why I came or question my fidelity. I will kill you for your insolence."
Deer had grown very proud since he had gone to live in the sky, and he was no longer timid as he had been on earth. His eyes flashed in his fury, and he arched his neck and lowered his antlered head, and rushed madly at Bear to push him from the path. But Bear was not afraid, for he had often tested his strength with Deer upon the earth. His low, hoarse growl sounded all over the sky, and he prepared to fight. They came together with a shock. For a long time they battled, until the bridge of burning colors trembled, and the heavens shook from the force of the conflict. The animals waiting by the lake at the end of the path looked up and saw the battle above them. They feared the results,
for they wanted neither bear nor deer to die. So they sent Wolf up to the sky to put a stop to the contest. When Wolf reached the combatants, Bear was bleeding freely, for Deer, with his antlers, had pierced his neck and side. Deer, too, was bleeding, where Bear's strong claws had torn a great wound in his head. Wolf soon stopped the battle, and Bear and Deer went away to dress their wounds. Then the other animals went up to the sky over Rainbow's flaming path, and they decided to live in the sky and to send their descendants back to earth when the new race of creatures should come. And they can still sometimes be seen, like clouds, hurrying across the sky in the shape they had on earth. But the blood of Bear and Deer dropped from them as they moved to the sky from the scene of their battle along the Rainbow Road. It fell freely upon the leaves of the trees beneath them and changed them into varied colors. And every year, when autumn comes in the North Country, the leaves take on again the bright and wondrous colors given to them by the blood of Bear and Deer when they fought on the rainbow path ages and ages ago. And Bear and Deer have never since been friends, and their descendants no longer dwell together in peace as they did in the olden days.
End of Rainbow and the Autumn Leaves.
Chapter 17 of Canadian Fairy Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Gail Nelson, Lakeside, California. Canadian Fairy Tales by Cyrus McMillan. Rabbit and the Moon Man. Once, long ago, Rabbit lived with his old grandmother deep in the Canadian forest, far from all other people. He was a great hunter, and all around, far and near, he laid snares and set traps to catch game for food. It was winter, and he caught many little animals and birds. He brought them home daily to feed himself and his old grandmother, and he was well pleased with his success. But after some weeks had passed, he was unable to catch any game. He always found his traps and snares empty, although many tracks were always around them, and there were many signs that animals were prowling about. He knew then that he was being robbed nightly, and that a thief was pilfering his traps. It was very cold, and the snow lay deep in the forest, and Rabbit and his old grandmother were in dire need of food. Every morning Rabbit rose very early and hurried off to his traps, but always he found them empty, for the thief had been ahead of him. He was greatly puzzled, for he could not think who the thief was. At last one morning, after a new fall of snow, he found the mark of a long foot near his traps, and he knew it was the foot of the game robber. It was the longest footprint he had ever seen, long and narrow and very light, like a moonbeam. And Rabbit said, "Now I shall rise earlier in the morning, and I shall go to my traps ahead of the thief and take my game, so that they will all be empty when he comes." Each morning he rose earlier to catch the thief, but the man of the long foot was always there before him, and his game was always gone. No matter how early Rabbit got up, the thief was always ahead of him, and his traps were always empty. So Rabbit said to his old grandmother, "The man of the long foot who robs my traps is always up ahead of me, no matter how early I rise. I will make a snare from a bowstring, and I will watch all this night, and I will surely catch him." He made a trap from a stout bowstring and set it beside his snares, and took the end of the bowstring some distance away to a clump of trees, behind which he hid. He hoped that the thief would step into the trap. Then he would pull the bowstring and tie him fast to a tree. He sat very quiet, waiting for the man of the long foot to appear. It was moonlight when he set out, but soon it grew very dark in the forest. The moon suddenly disappeared, but the stars were all shining on the white snow, and there were no clouds in the sky. And Rabbit wondered what had happened to the moon. He waited very still and a little frightened in the starlight. Soon he heard someone coming, sneaking stealthily through the trees. Then he saw a white light which dazzled his eyes. The light went towards the snares until it stopped just at the trap Rabbit had set. Then Rabbit pulled the bowstring, closed the trap as he had hoped, and tied the string fast to a tree. He heard sounds of a struggle, and he saw the white light move from side to side. But he knew that he had his prisoner fast, and that the man of the long foot was caught at last. He was much afraid of the white light, and he ran home as fast as he could and told his old grandmother that he had caught the game robber in the trap, and that he did not know who he was, for he was too frightened to look. And his grandmother said, "You must go back and see who it is, and tell him he must stop robbing your snares." But Rabbit said, "I do not want to go until daylight, for the moon has gone down and the forest is very dark." But his grandmother said, "You must go." So poor Rabbit, although he was very frightened by what he had seen, set out again for his traps. When he drew near to his snares, he saw that the white light was still shining. It was so bright that his eyes were dazzled, and he had to stop far from it. Then he approached nearer, but his eyes soon became very sore. There was a stream flowing beside him, and he bathed his eyes in the cold water, but it brought him no relief, and his eyes felt hot and red, and tears fell from them because of the dazzling light. Then he took great handfuls of snow and threw snowballs at the light, hoping thereby to put it out. But when the snowballs came near to the light, they melted and fell down like rain. Then, with his eyes still smarting, Rabbit in his rage scooped up great handfuls of soft black mud from the bottom of the stream, and forming it into balls, he threw them with all his force at the white light. He heard them strike something with a dull thud, and he heard loud yells from the prisoner, the man of the long foot, behind the shining light. Then a voice came from the light, saying, "Why did you snare me? Come and untie me at once. I am the man in the moon. It is near to the morning, and before dawn I must be on my way home. You have already spotted my face with mud, and if you do not loose me at once, I shall kill all your tribe." Poor Rabbit was more frightened than before, and he ran home and told his old grandmother what had happened. And his grandmother was also very frightened, for she thought that no good could come of it. And she told Rabbit to go back at once and untie the man in the moon, for the night was almost spent, and the dawn would soon be breaking. So poor Rabbit, trembling in his fear, went back to his traps. From a great distance he cried, "I will untie you if you will never again rob my snares, and if you will never come back to earth." And the prisoner in the trap promised and said, "I swear it by my white light." Then Rabbit approached very carefully. He had to shut his eyes and grope his way because of the bright light, and his lip quivered because of the great heat. At last he rushed in and cut the bowstring snare with his teeth. And the man in the moon hurried on his way, for he could already see the dawn in the east. But Rabbit was almost blinded while he was about it, and his shoulders were badly scorched. And ever since that time Rabbit blinks and his eyelids are pink, and water runs from his eyes when he looks at a bright light, and his lip always quivers, and his shoulders are yellow even when he wears his white winter coat, because of the great light and heat on the winter night long ago, when he loosed the man in the moon from the snare. And since that night the man in the moon has never come back to earth. He stays at his task in the sky, lighting the forest by night, but he still bears on his face the marks of the black mud which Rabbit threw at him. And sometimes for several nights he goes away to a quiet place, where he tries to wash off the mud. And then the land is dark, but he never succeeds in cleaning himself, and when he comes back to his work the marks of Rabbit's mud balls are still upon his shining face. End of Rabbit and the Moon Man.
Chapter 18 of Canadian Fairy Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Hannah Lynn. Canadian Fairy Tales by Cyrus McMillan. The Children with One Eye. Two little children, a boy and a girl, lived long ago with their widowed mother in the Canadian forest. The woman was very poor, for her husband had long been dead and she had to work very hard to provide food for herself and her children. Often she had to go far from home in search of fish and game, and at times she was absent for many days. When she went on these long journeys, she left her children behind her, and thus they were allowed to grow up with very little oversight or discipline or care. They soon became very unruly because they were so often left to have their own way, and when their mother returned from her hunting trips, she frequently found that they would not obey her, and that they did pretty much as they pleased. As they grew older, they became more headstrong and disobedient, and their mother could do very little to control them. And she said, "Someday they will suffer for their waywardness." One day the woman went to visit a neighbor not far away. She left a large pot of bear fat boiling on the fire, and she said to the children, "Do not meddle with the pot while I'm gone, for the fat may harm you if it catches fire." But she was not gone long when the boy said to the girl as they played around the pot, "Let us see if the fat will burn." So they took a burning stick of wood and dropped it into the fat, and stood looking into the large pot to see what would happen. The fat sputtered for an instant. Then there was a sudden flash, and a tongue of flame shot upwards from the pot into the faces of the children. Their hair was burned to a crisp, and their faces were scorched, and they ran from the house crying with pain. But when they reached the outer air, they found that they could not see, for the fire had blinded their eyes. So they stumbled around in darkness, crying loudly for help, but no help came. When their mother came home, she tried every remedy she thought might restore their sight, but all her medicine was unavailing, and she said, "You will always be blind. That is the punishment for your disobedience." So the children lived in darkness for a long time, but they were no longer headstrong and unruly, and although they could no longer see, they were less trouble to their mother than they were when they had their sight, for they did not now refuse to do her bidding. One day, when their mother was far away hunting in the forest, an old woman came along and asked the children for food, and they brought good food to her as she sat before the door. After she had eaten, she said, "You are blind, but I can help you, for I am from the land of the little people. I cannot give you 4 eyes, but I will give you 1 eye between you. You can each use it at different times, and it will be better than no sight at all. But handle it with great care and do not leave it lying on the ground." Then she gave them an eye, which she took from her pocket, and disappeared. So they used the 1 eye between them, and when the boy had the eye and the girl wished to see anything, she would say, "Give me the eye," and her brother would carefully pass it to her. When their mother came home, she was very glad when she found that they had now some means of sight. One day, when their mother was away again, the boy went into the forest with his bow and arrows. He carried the eye with him. He had not gone far when he saw a fat young deer, which he killed. The deer was too heavy for him to carry home alone, so he said, "I will go and get my sister, and we shall cut it up and put it in a basket and carry it home together." He went home and told his sister of his good fortune, and he led her to where the deer lay, and they began to cut up the body. But they had forgotten to bring a basket or a bag. He called to his sister, saying, "You must weave a basket into which we can put the meat to carry it home." And his sister said, "How can I make a basket when I cannot see? If I am to weave a basket, I must have the eye." The boy brought the eye to her, and she made a large basket from green twigs. When she finished making the basket, the boy said, "I must finish cutting up the meat. Give me the eye." So she brought him the eye, and he proceeded to chop up the meat and to put it in the basket. Then he said, "Why can we not have a meal here? I'm very hungry." His sister agreed that this was a good idea, and he said, "You cook the meal while I pack the meat." The girl made a fire, but she was afraid she would burn the meat. So she said, "I cannot see to cook. I must have the eye." By this time her brother had finished packing the meat into the basket, and he brought her the eye, and she went on with her cooking. The fire was low, and she said, "I must have some dry wood. Bring me some dry pine." The boy wandered off into the forest in search of wood, but he had not gone far when he stumbled over a log and fell to the ground. He called to his sister in anger, saying, "You always want the eye for yourself. How can I gather dry pine when I cannot see? Give me the eye at once." His sister ran to him and helped him up and gave him the eye. She found her way back to the fire, but as she reached it, she smelled the meat burning on the spit. She shouted, "The meat is burning and our dinner will be spoiled. Give me the eye at once so that I may see if the meat is cooked." The boy was some distance away, and in his anger he threw the eye to her, saying, "Find it. I am not going to walk to you with it if you are too lazy to come and get it." The eye fell to the ground between them, and neither of them knew where it lay. They groped for it among the dead leaves, but as they searched for it, a woodpecker, watching from a branch of a tree nearby, swooped suddenly down and gobbled it up and flew away. As they were still searching for it, the old woman who had given it to them came along. She had been hiding among the trees, and she had seen the woodpecker flying away with her gift. She said, "Where is the eye I gave you?" "It dropped from my head," answered the boy, "and I cannot find it in the grass." "Yes," said the girl, "it dropped from his head, and we cannot find it." "You have lied to me," said the old woman, "and you have disobeyed, and for that I shall punish you." And with her magic power she changed the boy into a mole and the girl into a bat, and said, "Now live blind upon the earth, with only your sense of sound to guide you." At once the boy and the girl were changed, and so the mole and the bat appeared upon the earth. End of The Children with One Eye. Recording by Hannah Lynn.
Chapter 19 of Canadian Fairy Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Scott Bennett, Gordonsville, Tennessee. Canadian Fairy Tales by Cyrus Macmillan. The Giant with the Gray Feathers. Once, long ago, when the Blackfeet Indians dwelt on the Canadian plains, there was a great famine in all the land. For many months, no buffaloes were killed, and there was no meat to be had at any price. One by one, the old people dropped off because of a lack of food, and the young children died early because there was no nourishment, and there was great sorrow everywhere. Only the strong women and the stronger warriors remained alive, but even they gradually grew weaker because of the pinch of the hunger sent into the land by famine. At last, the chief of the tribe prayed that the great chieftain of the Indians might come into his territory to tell the people what to do to save themselves. The great chief was at that time far away in the south country, where the warm winds were blowing and the flowers were blooming. But one night he heard the chief's prayer borne to him on the winds, and he hastened northward, for he knew that his people on the plains were somehow in dire distress. Soon he arrived at the village of the hungry tribe. "Who has called me here?" he asked. "It was I," answered the chief. "My people are all starving because there are no buffaloes in the country, and if you had not come we should soon have all perished." Then the great chief looked upon his people, and he noticed that the old folks and the little children had disappeared. Only a few children were left, and they had pinched cheeks and sunken eyes. And he took pity on them and said, "There is a great thief not far distant. He is probably a wicked giant, and he has driven all the buffaloes away. But I will find him and soon you shall have food." And the people were all comforted, for they knew that the great chief would keep his word. Then the chief took with him the young chief's son and set out on his quest. The people wanted to go with him, but he said, "No, we shall go alone. It is a dangerous duty, and it is better that, if need be, 2 should die in the attempt, than that all should perish." They journeyed westwards across the prairies towards the great water in the west, and as they went, the youth prayed to the sun and the moon and the morning star to send them success. Soon they came to the rolling foothills covered with sweet grass and scrubby pine, but still they saw no signs of buffalo. At last they reached a narrow stream, on the bank of which they saw a house with smoke coming from the chimney. "There is the cause of all our troubles," said the chief. "In that house dwells the giant buffalo thief and his wife. They have driven all the animals from the prairies until not one is left. My magic power tells me it is so." Then, by his magic power, he changed his companion into a sharp-pointed straight stick, while he himself took the shape of a dog, and they lay on the ground and waited. Soon the giant and his wife and their little son came along. The boy patted the dog on the head and said, "See what a nice dog I have found. He must be lost. May I take him home?" His father said, "No, I do not like his looks. Do not touch him." The boy cried bitterly, for he had long hoped for a dog of his own, and his mother pleaded for him so hard that at last the giant father said, "Oh, very well. Have your own way, but no good can come of it." The woman picked up the stick and said, "I will take this nice straight stick along with me. I can dig roots with it to make medicine." So they all went to the giant's house, the giant frowning angrily, the woman carrying the stick, and the boy leading the dog. The next morning, the giant went out, and soon came back with a fat young buffalo, all skinned and ready for cooking. They roasted it on a spit over the fire, and had a good meal. The boy fed some meat to the dog, but his father, when he saw what the boy was doing, beat him soundly and said, "Have I not told you the dog is an evil thing? You must not disobey me." But again the woman pleaded for her boy, and the dog was fed. That night, when all the world was asleep, the dog and the stick changed back to their human form and had a good supper of what was left of the buffalo meat. And the chief said to the youth, "The giant is the buffalo thief who keeps the herds from coming to the prairies. It is useless to kill him until we have found where he has hidden them." So they changed back to the shapes of dog and stick and went to sleep. The next morning the woman and her boy set off to the forest near the mountain to gather berries and to dig up medicine roots. They took the dog and the stick with them. At noon, after they had worked for some time, they sat down to have their luncheon. The woman threw the stick down on the ground, and the boy let the dog run away among the shrubs. The dog wandered to the side of the mountain. There he found an opening like the mouth of a cave. Peering into the place, he saw many buffaloes within, and he knew that at last he had found the hiding place of the giant's plunder. He went back to the woman and the boy and began to bark. This was the signal agreed on with his companion. The woman and her son thought he was barking at a bird, and they laughed at his capers as he jumped about. But he was in reality calling to his comrade. The stick understood the call and wiggled like a snake through the underbrush to the dog's side, unseen by the boy and his mother. They then entered the large cave in the side of the mountain, and there they found a great herd of buffaloes, all the buffaloes that had been driven from the prairies. The dog barked at them and snapped at their heels, and the stick beat them, and they began to drive them quickly out of the cavern and eastward toward the plains. But they still kept the shape of dog and stick. When evening came, and it was time for the boy and his mother to go home, the boy searched for the dog, and the woman looked for her stick, but they could not find them, and they had to go home without them. Just as the woman and her son reached their house on the bank of the river, the giant thief was coming home too. He chanced to look to the east, and there he saw, far away, many buffaloes running towards the foothills where the sweet grass grew. He was very angry, and he cried loudly to his son, "Where is the dog? Where is the dog?" "I lost him in the underbrush," said the boy. "He chased a bird and did not come back." "It was not a bird he chased," said the giant. "It was one of my buffaloes. I told you he was an evil thing and not to touch him, but you and your mother would have your way. Now my buffaloes are all gone." He gnashed his teeth in a great rage and rushed off to the hidden cave to see if any buffaloes were left, crying as he went, "I will kill the dog if I find him." When he reached the cave, the chief and the youth, still in the form of a dog and a stick, were just rounding up the last of the buffaloes. The giant rushed at them to kill the dog and to break the stick, but they sprang upon an old buffalo and hid in his long hair, and clinging on tightly, the dog bit the buffalo until the old animal plunged and roared and rushed from the cave, bearing the chief and the youth concealed on his back. He galloped eastward until he reached the herd far away on the prairie, leaving the giant far behind to make the best of his anger. Then the chief and the brave youth took their old form of men, and in high spirits they drove the herd of buffaloes back to their hungry people waiting patiently on the plains. The people were very pleased to see the great chief and the youth returning to the village with the great herd of fat buffaloes, for they knew now that the famine was ended. But as they drove the animals into a great fenced enclosure, a large gray bird flew over their heads and swooped down upon them and pecked at them with its bill and tried to frighten them and drive them away. The great chief knew by his magic power that the gray bird was none other than the giant thief who had stolen the buffaloes and who had changed himself into a bird to fly across the prairies in pursuit of them. Then the chief changed himself into an otter and lay down on the bank of the stream, pretending to be dead. The gray bird flew down upon him, for he thought he would have a good meal of fat otter. But the chief seized him by the leg, and changing back to his own form, he bore him in triumph to his camp. He tied him up fast to the smoke hole of his tent, and made a great fire inside. The giant cried, spare me, and I shall never do you more harm." But the chief left him on the tent pole all night long, while the black smoke from the fire poured out around him. In the morning, his feathers were all black. Then the chief let him down, and he said, "You may go now, but you will never be able to resume your former shape. You will henceforth be a raven, a bird of ill omen upon the earth, an outlaw and a brigand among the birds, despised among men because of your thefts, and you will always have to steal and to hunt hard for your food." And to this day the feathers of the raven are black, and he is a bird of ill omen upon the earth because of his encounter with the great chieftain long ago. End of The Giant with Gray Feathers.
Chapter 20 of Canadian Fairy Tales. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Monibo, Vancouver, Canada. Canadian Fairy Tales by Cyrus Macmillan. The Cruel Stepmother. Once, long ago, when the Blackfeet Indians dwelt on the Canadian prairies, a poor Indian and his 2 children, a boy and a girl, were living near the bank of a great river. The children's mother had long been dead, and they had long been left to the care of their father. Their father did not think that it was right that they should grow up without a woman's kindness, and he decided at last to take another wife. So he went far away to a distant village, and there he married a queer woman of another tribe. Soon times grew hard in the North Country, and it was very difficult to get food. The family lived for many days on roots and berries, and often they were very hungry because there was no meat. Now it happened that the woman the man had married was a very wicked witch woman, who was capable of doing many evil deeds. She had no love for her stepchildren, and she treated them very cruelly. She blamed them for the lack of food in the house, and beat them soundly. She said, "You gluttonous brats, you always eat too much. It is little wonder that we cannot keep the house supplied with food." The man saw his wife's cruelty to the children, but although it made him sad and at times angry, he did not interfere, for he thought the woman should rule her home. One night, in early spring, as the man slept, his first wife appeared to him in a dream, and said, "Hang a large spider web across the trail in the forest where the animals pass, and you will get plenty of food. But be good to my children. Their cruel stepmother is planning to kill them." And she told him where to look for the magical spider web. The next day, the man found the large spider web, and he went far away into the forest and hung it from the trees over the trail where the animals passed. That evening, when he went back to the web, he found many animals entangled in its meshes, for it had magical power. He killed the animals and brought them home, and that night they had a good fat supper of roast deer meat. Day after day the magical spiderweb gave him great numbers of rabbits and deer, as the vision of his dead wife had told him in the night, and from that time on the family did not want for food. But the man's success in hunting only angered his witch wife. She had now no cause for complaint against the little children, and she could no longer scold them and say that because of them there was no food in the house. Her hatred for them grew stronger each day, and at last she decided to kill them and to kill their father as soon as she could. Their father was going away on the morrow in search of wood to make arrows for his bows, and she thought she would have a good chance to kill them while he was gone. Then she would kill their father when he returned. So she laid her plans. But that night the vision of his first wife came again to the man as he slept, and it said, "Your present wife is a witch woman. She plans to kill the children tomorrow while you are away, and when you come home she will kill you too. You must kill her while there is yet time. Remember my little children." When the man awoke in the morning he was much alarmed, because of the story told him by the vision of the night. He had no longer trusted his witch wife, and he decided to get rid of her. But he feared she would attack the children before he could prevent it. So when the witch wife went out to get water from the stream to make breakfast, he gave each of the children a stick, a white stone, and a bunch of soft moss, and he said, "You must run away from here and stay away until I can find you, for you are in great danger. You will find these 3 things I give you of great use. Throw them behind you if any evil thing pursues you, and they will keep you from harm." The children, in great fear, at once ran away into the forest. Then the man hung his magical spiderweb over the door of the house, and sat quietly inside waiting for his wife to come back. In a little while she came home, carrying a pail of water, but she did not see the web with its fine strands hanging across the door, and when she walked into it she was at once entangled in its meshes. She struggled hard to get free, but her head was inside the door, while her body was outside, and the web held her fast around the neck. Then the man said, "I now know that you are a cruel witch woman. You will beat my children no more." With his stone axe he struck her a mighty blow, which completely severed her head from her body. Then he ran from the house as fast as he could, and went towards his children, who were watching from not far away. But the man was not yet done with the cruel witch woman. As he ran from the house, her headless body, freed from the spiderweb, ran after him, while her severed head, with eyes staring and hair flying, followed the children, sometimes bumping along the ground and sometimes rising through the air. The father thought it would be well to go in a different direction from the children, and he went west, while they went east. The children were very frightened when they saw the horrible head behind them, slowly gaining upon them. Then they remembered their father's magical gifts. When the head was close upon them, they threw their sticks on the ground at their backs, and at once a dense forest sprang up between them and their pursuer. The children said, "Now we will rest here for a while, for we are nearly out of breath. The wicked head cannot get through that dense forest." And they sat on the grass and rested. Soon, however, the pursuing head emerged from the thick trees. The children got up and ran as hard as they could, but close behind them came the severed head, rolling its eyes and gnashing its teeth in a great frenzy and uttering terrible yells. It was very near to them when the children again remembered their father's gifts. They threw the white stones behind them, and at once a high mountain of white rock rose between them and their enemy. They sat on the ground and rested, and said, oh dear, what shall we do? We have only one means of safety left, these little bits of moss." The wicked head hurled itself against the mountain, but it could not get through. A big buffalo bull was feeding on the grass near it, and the head called to him to break a road through the mountain. The bull rushed at the mountain with all his force, but the mountain was so hard that it broke his head and he fell down dead. Some moles were playing in the soft earth near by, and the head called to them to make a passage through the hill. So the moles searched and found a soft earthy place in the midst of the rock, and soon they tunneled a hole to the other side of the mountain, through which the head was able to pass. When the children saw their pursuer coming out of the mole's tunnel, they cried loudly and ran away as fast as they could. At last, after a very long chase, the head was almost upon them, and they decided to use their last means of protection. They threw the wet moss behind them, and at once a long black swamp appeared where the moss had fallen, between them and their wicked follower. The head was going at such a great speed, bumping over the ground, that it could not stop. It rolled into the swamp and disappeared into the soft mud, and was never seen again. The children then went home to wait for their father. It was a long journey, for they had run far, but their father never came. Months and months they waited, but he did not come, and they grew up to be great magicians, and very powerful among their tribe. At last, by their magic power, they learned what had happened to their father. Their stepmother's body continued to follow him as he ran toward the west. It followed him for many days. Then, by his magic power, which the vision of his dead wife had brought to him, he changed himself into the sun and went to live with his wife in the sky country. But the old witch woman also had magic power, and she changed herself into the moon and followed him to the land of the stars. And there she still pursues him. And while he keeps ahead of her, and she cannot catch him, night follows day in all the world. But if she overtakes him, she will kill him, and day will disappear, and night shall reign for evermore upon the earth. And the Blackfeet of the plains pray that he will always keep in front in the race with his former witch wife, so that there may be always night and day in succession in all the land. End of The Cruel Stepmother. Recording by Monibo, Vancouver, Canada.